Hi everyone, and welcome to our second lecture for pedagogical documentation. So this week what we're going to do is focus on this idea of what is assessment of, for and as learning when we're looking at the very early years. So our plan for this lecture, we're going to look at pedagogical documentation as assessment. We're going to focus on some ways that it can be diagnostic. So looking at floor books, learning journeys, digital portfolios, then exploring and pulling out that of, for and as assessment, and building on all of the elements within a play-based setting. So what I want you to do while we're thinking about all of these is, if we take two little children that we may have in our centre or our school, what do we know about them and what do we need to do in order to really plan effectively for these children? So this is Liam and Joe, and as you can see, they're best mates, hugging one another. So what we want to do is to make sure that we can create the best learning environment for them, together with setting up the right activities to enhance their learning in some way. So we want to think about the students that you had on prac. So when you were working with those very young learners, I want you to think about, what did you know about them and what did you do to create the best experiences for them? So building on what it says in our EYLF about giving children agency, how do we show their voice? So you'll notice in these pictures that the children are all participating in what we would call floor books. And floor books are a way of children being able to show what they know about certain things, and then to build on to things that they might want to know about things as well, and then what they've learnt. So we're showing them through the process of their learning. So these floor books are being used outside. They are a part of our pedagogical documentation, because quite often floor books can become part of the experiences that parents and caregivers will see as the result of the learning that the children have participated in. So how do we show their voice? We make sure that whatever we do is very authentic. We make sure that the children are actively involved in it. We don't make it distanced from the children. We don't make it that it is just the adult doing it to the children. So what we want to think about is how we create that reciprocal communication about learning. So when we're thinking about assessment, we have this broad idea that assessment is the ongoing process of gathering, analysing and reflecting on evidence to make informed and consistent judgments to improve student learning. It's not about taking a test at a certain point in time and saying this is what they can't do. It's about having that ongoing process where we are thinking about, how do we find out what they know? Then how do we take it to the next step and analyse out what's going on? And then how do we go, has that worked? Why hasn't it worked? And so on. So we always have to think, what are we doing and why are we doing it? So these things are really important. As you can see, the little one is adding some things into the floor book. So why do we assess? What are we assessing? And when do we assess? So we want to think about, why are we assessing? Are we assessing because an external body has told us that they need to collect data? We shouldn't have that as the prime focus for all of our assessment, but sometimes it is. We need to do on-entry data when the children are in pre-primary in year 1. We need to do certain types of formalised, standardised tests that will be part of your school-based requirements. So sometimes that why is outside of the classroom, but a lot of the times the why should be part of what we want to know. So why are we assessing? We want to know what developmental level the children are at. We want to make sure that whatever we plan is going to build on their knowledge and skills. We want to make sure that we are really targeting the students' needs, that we're enhancing their learning, or we're helping them to understand something that they didn't previously understand. That then leads us into, what are we assessing? So when we're assessing, you'll often find schools will want to focus on literacy and numeracy skills in the early years. Absolutely crucial. But we also want to know about their fine motor development. We want to know about their communication skills in a verbal sense. We want to know about their auditory processing. So we want to make sure that our assessment is not very narrow and just focused on the essential cognitive domain. We want it to be holistic in our assessment. And that then determines when we assess. So when we're assessing, we want to make sure that we are assessing not just at the end of a unit of work or at very specific set points in time. We need to have our assessment ongoing, and we need to make sure that when we assess, we have the right data at the right point in time. From kindergarten in some schools, and definitely pre-primary in all schools, we must do reporting twice a year. And generally schools will have parent meetings twice a year. Some schools will do them each term. So you need to know your children before you would want to have a meeting with parents. But sometimes we also want to be proactive if we're in pre-kindy or kindy in a school-based setting, and we want to have some data to be able to talk through them about lots of different things. If we're in a childcare setting, the idea of sending reports home is not there, but it's a constant assessment that we're doing. We're constantly evaluating them against their developmental needs. So let's have a think about, where does assessment and evaluation sit within our teaching and learning cycle? So we want to think about how we plan and program. We then think about the process we're going to use, which is our pedagogy within our classroom practice. We then have our assessment, which is how will I know when my students get there? That's what we are looking at. We think about what is the assessment process we will use at that point. Then we look at, where are they now? So we've assessed, we've recorded some information. We then go through a reporting process. That reporting can be to caregivers, it can be to systems, it can be to your school. But you'll notice in this diagram that evaluation is constantly being undertaken by the educator and by the school. So we want to think about everything. So where does assessment fit in our teaching and learning cycle? The answer is assessment fits at each point as we move along, and ongoing evaluation should be constant, because we should be looking at what is our planning and is it working with the students? What is our pedagogy? Is it working with the students? What is our assessment? Is it working within the environment that we have? And what is our reporting, and how are we making sure that it's meeting the needs of everyone in the community? This is one of my favourite cartoons because it really exemplifies what we often see happening, particularly in our middle and upper primary years in primary school and in our secondary school, where we have a lot of educators and administrators who focus on what they're teaching. With our early years, I don't find this as much, because I find that we are a little bit more embracing of different points in time development. So if you have a look, it'll say, I taught Stripe how to whistle. I don't hear him whistling, said his mate. And the other kid goes, I said I taught him, I didn't say he learned it. Now, I think sometimes what happens is those first two elements of the cartoon are what we see being done in a lot of schools, where a teacher will say, but I taught them that, but the test, they didn't show me that. So therefore, evaluation fits into that third box where we say, so they're not demonstrating it back to us. Why? Did we teach things that were developmentally appropriate, or did we aim too high and therefore developmentally they're not ready to do that? Did we provide the right experiences for the children to practice and rehearse those skills in different ways? Or did we just aim at a completely wrong direction? Did we have most of the children in the class be able to demonstrate that back to us, and then we just have a few children who need some extra intervention of some sort? Or is it just that some of the children were not ready, but the rest were, so we give them different experiences? So all of us need to go through that idea of, yes, of course we can teach something, but we really need to know, more importantly, did the children learn it? And therefore, how do we know? So these are some of the things that we have to think about. when we consider what are authentic assessments and what are authentic ways of refining, looking at, defining, working out what do we know that the children know and what do we know that they are having difficulties with. So we want to make sure that things are not a test, because a test immediately gives you the idea that it's going to be pen and paper. With our early years, we've got lots of kids who can't read and write enough to give you that. And if we're looking at our very young children, then definitely they can't read and write. So every type of evaluation that we do, our assessment topics and our assessment tools must be focused not on reading and writing. They have to be done in a different format. So let's look at some of these in a bit more depth. So one of the ones that you will start to see in lots and lots of early years centres, particularly around the 3 to 5 year old age group, is this idea of floor books. Now, a floor book, essentially, it's a large book, blank pages. The children record lots of different aspects of their learning, and they do it in small groups or as a whole group. And it might be that a teacher is doing some of the recording. It might be that the children are doing some of the recording, but they're recording their knowledge. They're recording their experiences. They're recording their learning that they're going through. It's called a floor book because the kids are using it on the floor. Now, this lady, Claire Warden, who you can see in the link, she has done a number of videos, and she was kind of like, I won't say the pioneer of it, but she's certainly somebody that has highlighted the importance and the way that we can use floor books in the best way possible for our children. Now, on the next slide is a video from her. If it works, fantastic, but otherwise I will also include a link to her video in Blackboard, so that way if it's not audible, you'll be able to still hear it.
This is called the Talking and Thinking Floor Book. They're blank books of large pieces of heavy-duty paper where we can record children's voices and their ideas so we can use them in our planning that we do. This one is what it looks like when children have been working on it. They've designed the front cover, they've signed in their ideas, and through here you can see these are some of their ideas about the way they're going to work and design a landscape. The floor book can be used for any variety of different things. For us, in the work I do, we can use the back of the floor book to show our delivery of the curriculum in a very child-centred way. If you're interested about how to use the floor book in more detail, along with 3D mind mapping and a variety of different strategies, there's soon to be a DVD coming out, so look out for that.
So as you can see, she just gave a really simple explanation of one. So you can explore that in more detail on some other videos and so on that she has available as well. Floor books I see being used beautifully in lots of pre-kindy and kindy rooms. I don't see them being used as much in a year 1 or 2 room, but definitely in our play-based centres I see a lot being done. So here's another one, or is this her same one?
This is called the Talking and Thinking Floor Book.
I'll continue onwards. So the features of it, it's a way for children to have their thoughts and ideas articulated. It might have some open-ended questions that you want the children to record. It generally is going to have some high-order thinking where we're not just wanting them to write down some straight answers to things. We're able to show quite a depth of learning within it. And because we can draw, we can write, we can stick some pictures in, we can have a huge range of different things, we've got lots of different ways that children can represent their thinking. Now, we can do it with them, but it's not something that the adults do for them. It's a group process that we do. Now, notes can be added in, conversations can be added in. I remember going out to a school and saw the most wonderful examples, and what the teacher was doing was that when she had those beautiful little conversations with children about something that had been part of the floor book in the morning. She recorded it on a sticky note, and then as the day progressed, she would bring out the floor book at the next mat time and say, while we were doing this activity earlier, I noticed that Jacob said this. Let's add it into our floor book. And so then she would put it in little speech bubbles and add little things. And so then the floor book was this constant annotation of the learning that had gone on during every single day over a period of time. And they had floor books. I think in this particular room, she had a floor book every couple of weeks that would add and have lots and lots of things in it. And it was this massive big, basically like you can see, the giant big sketchbooks. And I just thought it was a beautiful way of doing things. I see now a transition into a combination of the physical floor book and the digital elements that are recorded within something like Seesaw as well. But we'll talk more about that as we progress. So the other thing that you'll start to see is you're adding the floor book to some displays that are around the room, and that becomes something called potentially a learning journey. I often hear the phrase learning journey being applied for an evening that you invite the caregivers in, and the children take their caregivers on a bit of an adventure around the room with all the things that they've been doing. So it's a way that you get the children to document their learning in lots of different forms. So learning journeys are richer and more nuanced than a floor book. However, the floor book I find is more detailed. Your learning journey is more bit of a summary of what you've been going through. And it's designed to show every part of the process, not just the final product. And I think that's the great thing about your floor books combined with your learning journey, is you've got every element of that learning process. So the parents aren't just seeing this random thing being sent home in week 3 or at the end of a day. They're seeing lots of different things culminating in the floor book combined with the learning journey. So think about how you can build that even while you're on prac, because you can, of course, prompt a floor book being done in your room. There's nothing to stop it being done by you, even if your teacher's not using it currently. But you could have it for all the lessons that you do with the children. Now then, moving on to a more contemporary approach that a lot of schools are using, and that is to incorporate something like Seesaw. So you may have Seesaw, you might have Shobi, you might have some proprietary app that a childcare centre has. So it's designed to be able to be shared with the parents, and because it has a nature of ongoing work samples, it's very easy for you to track the learning as the children progress through the term, the semester and the year. So you can take photos very easily and share them with the parents, but you can also put in links to the curriculum. You can work out ways that you are able to showcase how it links to other aspects, not just a photo of some work or a photo of the child or a photo of something they have created. So a digital portfolio allows you to add in things that may be tricky to add in onto a floor book or a learning journey, because what you can add into a digital portfolio is also all the audio and the video. That's a bit trickier to add into a floor book. Floor books, you can have your text, your drawings and photos, but you can't have the audio or the video that gets added in. Mind you, I am seeing more and more floor books now where they might put in some QR codes to some different things. So think about how you can kind of intersect your physical products of your floor book together with your digital products that might be saved somewhere else. So let's think we've had a discussion about our floor books, our learning journeys and our digital portfolios. Let's have a think about why are we doing those things. So this comes down to the core of what is the purpose of any of this type of assessment and evaluation. So first of all, we want to be able to monitor the children's development and learning. We can't assume that every child fits into common expectations of development and learning just because they are 4 years old. We have our checklists that we can see. We've got our developmental stages that we can see, but that child may not fit those. So we're going to experience diversity in terms of culture, language, social experiences. All of those need to be recognised and taken into account. So we need to be able to assess to work out the needs of those individuals at specific times. We want to be able to use any assessment that we have to guide our planning and to work out, why are we doing what we're doing? So our assessment information, it really is essential for planning and implementing our appropriate programs. It informs us of what we need to teach, how long to teach it for, how are we going to teach it, and when we need to go back through that cycle and constantly review what we're doing. Now, the third point is one that I think in the early years we nail so much more than our upper primaries and secondaries. We really do look at every child as a tiny little individual and how each of those little individuals interact with us and with each other. So we want to make sure that whatever assessment processes we're using, that we are being specific to the needs of those individuals. We're making sure that it is screening what needs to happen together with what is supposed to happen, and then we work out what interventions that we may need to put in place or some other professionals that we might need. Which brings us on to our final point. We assess because we need to be able to report and communicate with others. Now, with the others, it could be primary caregivers. It could be other staff that we have at the end of the year, for example. You have a handover to make sure that you are catering for the best needs of every child. Making sure that we are reporting to parents appropriately is so important, but also we've got other organisations. So SCASA requires those semester reports from pre-primary onwards. Standardised tests like NAPLAN and our on-entry data, all of those need to be assessed, evaluated, and taken into account. So that's why we need to do it. Sometimes it's out of our hands and we're just told that we need to do these things. We are accountable to parents, to leadership in the school, and to the wider community as well. So have a little look. You've got things like the My Schools website. And on that, it has standardized testing results and it has the implications. So you can see the context of the school and you can see how the testing resulted in certain performance levels across the school. So all of that is why we need to assess in the early years. But what we want to make sure is that our assessment is not just those standardized tests. We want to make sure that we have a richness to our assessment. So what are the things that we are assessing? So we're always assessing the growth and developmental domains. We want to make sure that we are truly looking at the whole child and each child as an individual. We're assessing and evaluating the outcomes of our program. So we want to be able to use that diagram where we're looking at what are the pedagogical decisions that we are making. Is it actually creating an impact for the children? So we want to make sure that we're linking our assessment to the objectives of our specific lessons and the full outcomes of a program. This is such a mistake that I sometimes see teachers doing, and pre-service teachers as well, that we are looking at just the objective through that one particular lesson. We want to look at it over a much longer period of time. We want to make sure that we're looking at what we're doing over a whole term, over a whole semester, and over the whole year. Because what we want to make sure is that we are acknowledging and validating the patterns of development, the children's knowledge, their attitudes, and their interests, because it really changes as the year goes on. You won't see a steady growth and development from a lot of children. It'll kind of do this massive growth and then stop and pause for a little while and then do another big jump and so on. And sometimes children, you're like, oh my goodness, gosh, they're really struggling with this. Then all of a sudden it'll just click for them. But that's where you need to constantly be assessing and evaluating, because you need to be aware of the things that are actually making the really good positive impacts. So think about how and what you're doing and why. So in our last one, what are we assessing? We are constantly looking for any problems or concerns that you have. So you want to be using those anecdotal notes to write down those little things like, so-and-so is spending a lot of time asleep in the last week or so. Or, Johnny's having real issues whenever I want him to do some writing. I wonder if he's having problems with his hand coordination. This person's having some real issues and they're tending to fall over a little bit outside. I'm just going to keep a bit more of an eye on them. So you want to keep those records somewhere that you can refer back to them. We don't want to just have something really global that is only focused on the cognitive domain and academic development. So when are we assessing? We are assessing at the beginning of our program. We're assessing along the way. We're just assessing before and after we have a really concentrated emphasis on something. Essentially, we're doing a constant level of assessment. We're not just picking week 5 and week 10, we're going to do all our assessments. We have to have this range of assessments and different points in time that we're assessing. So if we have a look at our assessment principles, SCASA says that we must be valid, meaning that it must happen in a real and meaningful context and actually be assessing the outcome. It must be educative, meaning that the student should learn from the experience. So you shouldn't have a test that is just to check if they know something and most of the kids are going to get it wrong. Well, that's not nice. It should be fair. So it should allow each student to demonstrate the outcomes using their particular strengths in some way. It should be explicit. So we should make sure that the assessment criteria is stated clearly for the students so they know what information's to be gathered. And it should be comprehensive. So we should have a good range of information, different situations over a period of time, lots of information from observations, lots of different pieces of work that they've created, and lots of conversations and so on. So we want to make sure that we're putting into place those 5 key assessment principles. Now, if we then build it into some work from FLIR, is that our 5 criteria, this really matches in as well, doesn't it? So it must be valid, it must be reliable, it must be manageable, it must be trustworthy, it must be authentic. So this is our assessment approaches that we build. So we want to make sure that we are still meeting the SCASA requirements, but we're also thinking about this 5 criteria. Now, we'll often see the words assessment and evaluation used interchangeably. Hopefully, I've started to explain to you the difference between assessment being the idea of gathering data. So it's the way that we gather and record that data. However, evaluation is then what are we doing with that data? We're making judgments. So they're not the same. Assessment is the gathering. So we have an assessment tool to gather the data. Our assessment tool might be a checklist. Our assessment tool may be a set of anecdotal notes. Our assessment tool might be a video that we've collected of all the children and their climbing abilities. Our evaluation is looking at that data, not just one piece of data, but looking at lots of data and putting it together and going, this means this, or gosh, that student is really having difficulties in this area, or oh my goodness, I didn't realize they were so athletic and so well coordinated because I've been focused on other things that they've been doing. So we draw conclusions about the progress of them and the effectiveness of our teaching plans. So evaluation, big; assessment, specific tools. Okay, now when we talk about our evaluation, we've got our formative and we've got our summative. So think about how and when you would use each one. Now, let's come back and revisit this idea of assessment for, as, and of learning. So assessment for learning occurs when we use ideas about what the students have done to inform our teaching. And that falls under our diagnostic assessment. Assessment as learning is designed for the students to reflect on and monitor their own progress. That can be our formative assessment. Assessment of learning is when we're using it at the end to make judgments against some goals and standards. And that tends to be falling into our summative assessment. So when we're thinking about assessment and we're designing different tools, a lot of the things that we will do as a teacher should be sitting in the diagnostic, so that helps us to plan. We should have things that are formative, so we see, right, they've done this, they'll be able to see what they can and can't do, and then we want to have some summative. What I find in some classrooms is we tend to actually only have summative assessment, and so that just tells them what they don't know. It doesn't help assessment for learning or assessment as learning. It only looks at the assessment of the learning. So we want to make sure we've got all three blended together. Now, our final things. Let's do a quick review. Pedagogical documentation, wide range of ideas and processes. So our floor books, our variety of different formats that we can use for our pedagogical documentation. When we're thinking about assessment and evaluation, don't confuse the what with the how. So what are we assessing and how are we assessing it? Make sure they're different. So we're looking at student spelling, understanding of spelling. How are we doing that? We want to do it through a variety of means, which builds into our third point there, that we need to do as, of, and for learning. We need to make sure we've got it from the idea of how we can use it for diagnostic, formative, and summative purposes. So this week in the tutorial, we are looking at assessment and some practical ideas for it. We're going to explore this idea of the floor books a little bit more. We're looking at writing good objectives. I know you've done it lots of times. We're just going to do it a little bit more. And we're looking at this idea of planning for and with the children. So what are some practical strategies of how we could do that? So looking forward to chatting with you all this week. I will see you in our tutorials. Thanks, everyone.